Okay,
Do I have on my schedule the wrong thing? Was Andrea
He
not supposed to be?
was.
she was supposed to be here, but she had an emergency this morning, so I had to email.
Oh,
Yeah, she
oh,
will arrange another time for her. I sent an email, but it wasn't that many hours ago, so I apologize. Today we do have something to talk about, though, and so I'm glad you're here, Bob. This is very related to you. So once we know when Andrea is coming back, it will not be kept a secret. I can promise you that. So I'm going to do a brief intro, and Dene will do moderation, right, Dene?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
as he says.
So today is obviously ad hoc because of that, but I just wanted to point out on our website now, it's been a bit simplified. Two things only. One, record and schedule is one page. So once an event is done, you can click on the link and you'll have the record of that event. So it should be just simpler. Secondly, if you click on authorship in XR, this is where you have the live experience, a link to the first quarter presentation, which was last week, and a series in-person demos. If you have someone who is an academic doing authoring, please suggest them to us and we will do more. We have a series of questions. We're trying to make it more and more organized. If you click through to watch the demo, you will see they are in the same format. There is an AI summary, which has been audited. If there's something wrong, I change it, but it's so nice and simple to have it there and the video. So that makes sense, right, everyone? Any questions for that? No, right. So a brief presentation, and some of you have seen the very beginning, but don't worry, it's not a full repetition. It's a brief review, and then we move on. At the last minute, we call this shapes and transitions today.
What's 32 March?
Oh, that's called my fault.
You just don't want to go into April.
No,
April Fool's Day.
for several reasons. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Right, so we've talked about the volume, the cube, a lot, and there needs to be a lot more. But if we look at that as the cube and also kind of a matrix of folding and unfolding, we'll now look a little bit about what we talked about recently and how these things connect, right? So the notion is this: you still have a cube, obviously, but through whatever means, you stretch it down to read more. But more interestingly, you stretch it to the side, so you maybe can have the headings, references, all of that stuff, right? So that's cool. It can be lots of different columns. They can include different media, including images. And Bob Horn, one of the things it could actually contain in the images section is entire murals. You pull it out, you can interact with that, and massively should that be useful. Same you can do with any of the other things, just put it in different places. So the notion of that, for me, came from a friend, Sarah Walton, who's been actually teaching fiction, not academic, but fiction writing. Turns out that there's quite a few different models for using a spreadsheet for organizing your fiction. By the way, if that chat message is to me, please interrupt me and speak, because I obviously can't read it. If it's for someone else, that's fine. So what people do often with fiction, in each of these cells, you write down, let's say it's a travel story, what country it's in, who the main characters are, all of that stuff to help the author. Can that be useful in some kind of academic writing? Maybe. And to make it clear, it's not about AI. Some of it, of course, can be AI, but the point is to have different aspects of what you're reading or writing clearly accessible, right, in this type of a way. So I did two brief author tests. One of them is, here's an example of a live current feature. You can see the names that are in the section under the headings. It's not that scannable, but if it's pulled out to the side in a separate column, it becomes much more scannable. So it's a very beginning of columns, right? We also have this thing where you can add comments to a heading, and then they appear in line in the overview. They're like you're seeing an advisor and they say you need to add more references or something. So back to this, to the unfolded thing. It can be like this. Please don't read the titles at this point because they are a bit messy. But you can move the whole thing. You can click to edit the logic of the columns, which is really important. That can be based on an AI prompt or just programmatic, or it can be based on metadata, but you choose, which is very important for the environment we're building. And if there are sections you don't like, of course, you should be able to fold them away. Maybe bars appear, you move your hands like this. And of course, you should also be able to tear off something if you want it somewhere else. Interesting things like place names and images and so on, you should be able to do more with, like place names. Shouldn't be able to view them on a map, for instance, right? So in summary of this brief thing, before we get to the next, is the text here always faces the user. You can expand and contract it by folding. The logic is user editable, and you can tear off for more speciality. Jim.
I wanted to point out, Frode, that the fiction spreadsheet grid, which you are talking about and which you showed a moment ago, and which I have here because I made a copy, is almost identical in composition to Bob Horn's 2050 infomural, which is organized in a very, very clever grid. So relative to your idea, could what is used for fiction be useful for nonfiction? Bob and the group he was working with did it 15 years ago.
That's really phenomenal. And could you, if you have a link to that or an image, could you please put it in the chat?
I'll try, though I'm not conversant. Bob may be more able to do it more easily, but I'll try to figure it out.
I would just point out that we did not invent matrices or tables. They go back about 3,000 years to the very beginning of writing down things.
Yeah, it is, of course, a 2D spatial thinking, and the history of that, I agree with you, Bob, is fascinating, and some of it more recent than we might imagine, some of it a lot older. By the way, when we have a theme discussion or presentation or whatever, if someone has something like an image of this that they email me later, I'm very happy to put it on the record page. So if you don't have it now, Jim or Bob, that's fine.
Okay.
It's still useful to put in, like I did with Mark's drawing last week.
Okay.
Okay. Right, so.
Good.
All right, thanks. So here's the basic logic of this, and I call it the matrix because that's kind of cool. But of course, it is just a spreadsheet if you want to use a boring name, right? And it is very 2D. But the thing is that pulling in different directions gives you different things. So if we start with body text and you pull out to the side, you have maybe an outline. Oh my God, it's exactly what we did last year. If you pull to the other side, you have references. Oh my God, it's pretty much exactly what we did last year, which I think is beautiful that these things hang together. But now we start having a bit of additional stuff. On top, if you pull up a bit, you may have the title, author, date, all that stuff, which you can kind of toggle. But then this year, we really are focused on annotations. So the annotations you, as the reader of this, write, could maybe appear there. And then underneath that in the columns, how about things like notes, mark text, and so on, things you add. And then on the right, you have things that are extracted like dates, for timeline, place names, people names, blah, 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 right? Maybe. So here is a little bit clearer because this has been going through millions of edits. Any thoughts on just this?
No, it's a good idea.
Well, thanks, Bob. Cool.
And well executed, too.
And Bob, you actually saw the video before, so I thank you for that also. Mm-hmm. I saw your comment. So here's the question for today, and what I think will be really fruitful for us to discuss. What does it mean to fold and unfold? Because we have to reconcile a whole ton of stuff. Cube, matrix, free things in space, references, manuscript, paper or journal, references, all of these things. References twice, you see they're so important. So this week, for some reason, I've been crumpling paper, and I realized it's kind of relevant. So here you have it kind of folded out, same thing rolled up in a scroll, and then here completely messed up. But still, I can move it out. That's just to get away from the thinking of paper has to be just folded like this, like a napkin. That's a bit limiting. And it shouldn't only have to be folding along lines that are predefined, but maybe not, or maybe. So how, if we're going to have one view that is kind of like a spreadsheet, and we have the cube, how do we make them work together? What is the transition? So I'm not going to read this here because it's on the next page. And that is going, actually, what happened there? Did I lose it? Okay, I will read it. I think we've lost a thing. What unfolding and folding is in XR is the wrong language. What we're really talking about is going from one shape to another. Mm-hmm. They don't have to fold into each other. It's not actual origami, right? And what is the point of this? It's to give different views for overview, seeing connections, and analysis. So that's the repetition, simply going from one shape to another, and what the aim is. So then the question becomes, what shapes do we need? And please take this as provocations, not as the final answer. It most definitely isn't. But we need some shapes that where the knowledge object is one of many, like your sources or notes, right? We also need shapes where knowledge object is examined closely. It's abstracting a little bit on purpose. So one way of looking at that is spreadsheets and cubes. One way. Hopefully we can go beyond this. And then we have the question of how we should transition. So what I showed earlier was you just pull out and it becomes this. But I had a brief conversation with Fabienne this morning, and the idea came that imagine if you take your fist inside the cube and you do this, right? So you open up your hand. That means the cube opens up to a spreadsheet. Similarly, when you have a spreadsheet, you hold it and you do this, and it folds down to a cube, right? So this is where we're looking at what's on the Slack channel. Different gestures only work in certain positions.
Frode, can I jump in for a second? We're thinking right now, so we've been talking about cubes, right? And unfolding into 6 blocks, which is what a cube would result in. But with this particular, so I think what we're talking about is each object would have its own shape. So for example, this matrix that you're showing would be an accordion, right? It would actually be able to be like a fan. You can open it like a fan, and you'd be able to shape it on each particular column, be column-based or even row-based. So that would have its own shape. So once again, what we're talking about, which I think is interesting, paper has always bothered me because we have two sides, right, front and back, and then we turn the page to the next front and back. So we have this kind of, it's almost like you're breaking your thoughts. It's got to the point where unless it's non-trivial activity, you can get sidetracked, right, in reading a book. And I'm watching my students today, they do not have the non-trivial ability to read a book like we do. Turning a page with them breaks thought. But what I find interesting about what we're doing is that with this accordion shape or the cube shape or whatever shapes we develop, each object would have its own indigenous shape, which is developed to provide a non-trivial experience for each of those objects. And non-trivial means that there's no break in thought, that we can flow from one idea to another. So rather than be limited to a particular kind of static environment of the two-sided page, we can have any possible way of experiencing text. And that's revolutionary.
That is exactly the point, and I'm writing down a note for you here, Dene. Jim, go first, please, and then I'll come with my note.
I have a question for you, Frode. It's your use of the word cube. Do you mean cube as in all sides equal and identical, all squares, or do you really mean a prism or rectangular prism? Because if, for example, in tapestry, if Bob Stein is going to put together an oblique diagonal which shows 3 or 4 books, one behind the other, a book is typically rectangular. So a rectangular prism to me makes more sense. At the same time, a video is horizontal. So when you put multiple videos, one behind the other as a group on a diagonal, it automatically identifies kind of by the direction of the rectangle what you're looking at. The vertical rectangle could be, the vertical prism could be a book, it could be an article, it could be a PhD thesis, but they are all rectangular, not cubist. And the main reason I ask that is because I have a lot of thoughts about why a cube is special in terms of providing 6 points of view to whatever is in the center. So I just want to kind of raise that question now without going into it in depth, because I think cubes are special and they should be kept special when there's an alternative like the rectangular prism, although it's a more complex term.
Can I respond to that, Frode? So Jim, that's what I was getting at, is that would be just one particular type of shape that we'd be looking at, and it would be indigenous to something that needs to be special with that shape. But we could have a prism for things that need a prism. We could have a fan for things that need to be fanned out. So we can start to take control over the shape of objects in a way that paper doesn't necessarily allow us, right? Because we're beholden to a two-sided, particularly kind of 8.5 by 11, right? I just came from the Waterstones bookstore, and I was delighted to see large-sized books. But for the most part, books are pretty static in size, and only artist books challenge that really in any way. And artist books are considered special.
I'll point out that we're looking at some text right now, and it's going in 2 different directions. The flow of thought, to quote Dene, is going in 2 different directions. The text is mounted on an arrow, and we've got bigger and smaller cubes of something. I don't know what's in them. Or what's behind them, or what's on the different sides of them.
Mark, just 1 second. What Dene said there is really, really important, and it's basically the point. Sorry, I got stuck on my own chair. Jim, what you brought up now is the topic for today, so it's perfect. I just want to add 2 things to it, and please let's talk more about that once I finish the slideshow. Just a few more slides left. And that is, first of all, in some monster movie a few years ago, someone does something special and someone else says, "How do you know that?" And the guy says, "That kind of knowledge is hidden in books." Right? And it's supposed to mean, people don't read. But what Dene is talking about, the students, books really do hide information. You really have to move a piece of paper to see more text. So I think it is hugely, hugely relevant to this display we can today. And the thing on the left there, Bob, is it is a version of what I showed earlier, where imagine you have all these things, and here's a cube that you don't want. So you do this. You take your hand inside the cube, and now it's tiny. So either it stays tiny, or Fabienne style, it goes onto your wrist, maybe, as in a copy-paste thing. But
Yep.
it's an idea of, and then you make it big. Mark, I'll just finish this slide and then we're on to you. Is that okay? Or is it, okay, cool, sorry. Just to finish this. Also here is, you can pull out any column, right? So imagine this fist open closing transition. You have the places maybe. You take your hand into the column of places and you do this. And that's how it explodes into spatial all over the place view. So we're trying to find gestures that really work to make things go big and small, connect and not connect. So that's the point of that. Yeah, because the problem is, if we're going to have a hyperspatial environment, spatial hypertext in this, what's going to be in it and where is it going to live, right? We got to have at least citations or references or sources like the cubes represent, because that's kind of folded small. But it also needs to be recorded or live somewhere. So this is the final statement of this. That's why I'm suggesting here that the spatial hypertext as a saved layout lives inside this kind of a matrix view where you can choose what you want to come out from it. And stop sharing and over to Mark.
I was prompted really to reply to Jim's point that certainly my understanding is the cube is in a way sort of a placeholder. It was an idea and a shape discussed, but in another way I think at this point is that it at the moment is the word that describes effectively the selected object in the environment which we are unpacking. I mean, one question is, do we only have one active cube in the environment at the time? Because one of the things that I keep thinking about is that if, for instance, we open out the particular cube, do we lose all the context of all the other documents we have in the space, which we put there for a reason? So we lose actually quite a lot of the power of the view that we have. But if we put too much of one thing on display, but the other thing is that whether it's a cube or a circle or a sphere or goodness knows what, it's only a little blob of. I mean, they're all blobs of data in the environment. What we show them as should have. I mean, the point of spatial hypertext thing is where they are and what they look like has a point. It's not just a random grid because it had to go somewhere. That was basically the gist, the depth of what spatial hypertext is. So we lose that at our peril. And so it is quite interesting to think, well, will we want to expand two things at a time? But how much we see is probably moot. I mean, it's going to be very complex to get all the stuff that's just been shown, but that is just ones and zeros sitting in the environment. The only thing we need to think about is how much we're actually trying to pull through and whether we're sort of, in a sense, trying to load the whole of Wikipedia or every time we just look at something. Thanks.
That is the key question for today. And the illustration that you sent, Mark, sorry, I couldn't find it right there, of what's going to be in the space, how many active things. This is what we need to untangle. And one of the things that the notion of the matrix hides in a cowardly way, I would say, is the difference between the thing you are authoring, like your notepad or manuscript, compared to what you're reading. I'm not sure how we can really make that feel separate for the author, like you have Microsoft Word open and your PDF viewer, that kind of thing. Of course, it shouldn't be flat and horrible like that, but it should feel a little different. So I will now defer back to Dene. I've done the little bit of intro provocation, and I hope there will be a lot more throwing of ideas around. Oh, Dene, are you talking? You're muted.
I was being polite. I hate that when that happens. Yeah, so let's bring it up to comments. Like I said, I think it's a great idea to think about rather than just cubes. We have shapes, and we need to think about terminology for that. But every object would have its own behaviors and its own shape. And we can even decide, we can even think about, like, if you're writing a paper, the shape of that. If you're doing a diagram, the shape of that. We can start to kind of lay out a language for the different types of writing, the different types of potential shapes. The question I have for myself is, we're talking about authorship, and we're authoring everything. Is there a way to make it possible for our users to author themselves? And if so, how can we make that possible? Because it's very difficult to code in WebXR. And are we going to have particular shapes available and ways to populate them? That might be the easiest way to do that. With suggestions, are we going to have maybe, another grant where we invite people to come and give us the shapes they want, and we make handmade works for them? I mean, there's possibilities here. I see a hand up, Bob's hand, and then Frode.
Well, I'll just give you my reactions to what I've seen so far. Um, First of all, what I do is map onto the cubes that I'm seeing as um, idea chunks. They're little chunks of ideas. They can in the world that I've lived in for the last 30 years or 40 years, I've made about, I'm estimating 50,000 idea chunks. And some of them have some idea chunks are full tables. Some are diagrams, integration, and others are integration of other forms of integration of words and visual elements, shapes of different kinds. So I'm very excited by the direction that this is going. I think you're moving along really wonderfully in several directions, and I'd be able to give you a you know profusion of different kinds of objects. One of the things that in terms of the shapes, for me, is I have 25 shapes. I have 25 identified shapes that include both what kind of text is included and not included, what kind of visual element is included and other kinds of visual elements are not included, and how they are integrated. I'll give you just as one example of that, argumentation mapping, which I think maybe most of you are familiar with, which has 6 different kinds of text and excludes all the other kinds of text, has usually a tree-like structure. That is, it puts together what I would call all the little cubes into a tree-like structure. And if you're going to have a good debate and really organize it and allow many people to do that, you need to have a structure like that. And that structure's been around for a while, since Toulmin invented it, probably not far from the hotel you're in today, Dean. And so on. So there are 25 such structures, at least, that I call scaffoldings that put together the cubes. I'll finish right there, and I'm happy to give a demonstration of all this sometime.
That'd be great, Bob. I'd love that. And welcome the folks that came in just now. Jimmy, I saw you were here. Peter, you're here now. Welcome. And also Alan. Good to see you all. So where just a quick side comment, Bob, where was Steve when he was doing that? Because I'm at the Bloomsbury Hotel right at Great Russell Way.
Well, I don't know. He was somewhere. He was somewhere in England, writing his books, or maybe by that time he was already at Northwestern. But
I think, yeah.
he's an Englishman and went through the usual Oxford or Cambridge process, and then did a lot of invention.
Yeah. Frode has his hand up, and then we have Tom and Mark.
I've got my hand up and my screen here. On the question of the doing, as you've all seen this a million times, so I have here linked a document where I'm trying to write a user guide for someone to author for the next volume of our book in our XR environment. So the point, I'm not going to go through it with you, but the point is it's one way for me to think about what the actions that should be enabled should be. And it's very, very, very difficult, at least for me, right? We have to go through the things of, as we talked about, the different views, how you deal with references and AI. So the language here is, thank you for trying to author blah, blah, blah for this basic information. It's very, very hard, but it's definitely something we should do. We should figure out a way to communicate to people how this works. And my final comment on that is, my ideal way of designing software, first you do the ad, then you do the user guide, then you do the spec. Because if you can't explain something in a user guide, how can we expect people to figure it out? Thank you, Dene.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, just sort of listening to the conversation up to this point, and I missed the very beginning of the presentation, so apologies if there was something critical in there that's going to make me misspeak here, but we'll see. The thing about the cube and the thing about shapes in general is, no matter what shape it is, it's a box. It is a container, and that's both good and bad. I mean, if you don't want stuff pouring out over the table, that's fine. But there's always this tension, and this goes back to Peter's comment about the book as well. There's a tension between ideas and the containers we put in them. And we have become so used to the metaphor of the book, or the artifact of the book, over the last 500 years, 2,000 years, if you want to go back to Roman codexes. But that, we think of that as the idea itself. And we often, and the same thing is true with paper and documents and things like that. We are now embarking on technologies that allow us to explode that in a way that I don't think was possible until very recently. And I think we've talked about this for a while. Again, I keep going back to Ted Nelson and how he thought about ideas, and how in terms of his original vision around Xanadu and things like that. So I'm concerned in terms of the metaphors that we use, that they don't become prisons. And in terms of, we need to be able to slide in and out of these metaphors easily. And to Mark's point earlier, I don't think one box is in any way, shape, or form going to be sufficient. I mean, I want a universe of boxes. I want interconnected boxes. I want those interconnections in unusual ways, because to me, it's not about the box. It's not about the book. It's not about the paper. It's about the idea. It's about the brain. The quote I put there from Walter Benjamin about, it's connecting the source box of the writer to the source box of the reader, of the scholar. That's what it's for. And so we need to be constantly asking ourselves, are we doing a good job of propagating ideas, as opposed to getting stuck in the tech metaphor? And that's been a problem when two-dimensional tech. It's going to still be a problem here. I mean, I see how we're struggling with just trying to get the motions right, and the amount of time and effort that Frode and everybody's having to put into getting the motions right and all this sort of stuff, which is important. But we also have to realize that we are handicapping ourselves in a sense in an XR environment, because we're doing metaphors for our own motions when it comes to that too. So if the objective here is to create idea spaces, then we need to be careful about not walling those off. That's the main point I wanted to make.
I respond to that, Tom. I think it's a good point. The thing that concerns me is that a user will get into the space, bringing with them the physical world, right? And so
Yeah.
what we're trying to anticipate here in this group is how to think about the next way of thinking. And we're doing
Right.
it in a way so that we can lead people. I call it breadcrumbing, right? Leave a breadcrumb so people can get there. So
Yep.
we use some terminology that helps to make some sense of it, but we start to introduce new concepts where we take them elsewhere, right?
Mm.
I mean, hypertext existed a very long time, long before Mark
Yeah.
Bernstein even looked at Michael Joyce's Afternoon Story, or, Wendy was creating microcosm, right? Those things came out of the zeitgeist of the period that had been long discussed. And I would say even Ted Nelson was just articulating what had been happening with print text for a long time, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
But giving it
absolutely.
that word and showing it how it functions, people go, aha, we've been doing that, right? We've
Yeah.
been living in a hypertextual environment for all of our lives. We just didn't have a word for it. And now we have a real way to instantiate it in a space that makes a lot of sense. That's
Hmm.
what we're trying to do here, right?
Right.
And I think the thing that we keep bringing up is, we're calling it text, we're calling it interactions, we're calling it all these things, but in the end, it's going to be something else. We may be able to come up with those terms. It may be someone else down the line. We may be the Ted Nelsons or the of the day or
Yeah.
not, right? Probably not. Maybe.
We can build the playground. We can't dictate what the games are going to be in that playground.
But that then brings me back to my comment. We're showing what can be done, but we haven't
Mm.
created the tools that other people can use yet.
Right.
So at the next step of this project is creating those tools if it's possible. How can that be done? And my lab is looking at ways to do that in terms, we can do this with Unity and Unreal Engine without batting an eye.
Right.
Sticking to WebXR that makes it tough, right? But
Yeah.
anyway,
No, to me, it's again, since we're dealing with documents and other types of idea media, as I will call it, I just want to see to what extent we can push people beyond that metaphor of paper and pin up boards or whatever the cube represents in that sense. And then that's that's the main problem I have with a cube is as the metaphor. And it's not the shape or anything like that. I think it's as good a shape as any, but it is still a box. No matter what, a sphere is a box. It just doesn't have corners. You know?
well, we've been calling them
So
knowledge objects, and that gets
yeah,
around the idea of documents, right? And if we're calling it knowledge objects, then maybe we're calling it knowledge spaces or knowledge
yeah,
containers. So
yeah.
there's things we can do to get around that, and we can probably begin to kind of tease that out as we're exploring the space, right? It's really great because we've got a year and a quarter behind us.
Mhm.
Made a lot of progress. I mean, you should have been here last year at this time.
I wish I had been.
Good ice picks.
Uh, not sure y'all
Mark,
wish with.
yeah, we have Mark and then Peter and then Frode and then Bob.
So quickly, what made me put my hand up was I was just thinking when I was listening to Bob speaking earlier, composites sprang to mind. It was an idea that was around when people was first doing well on the way to what became spatial hypertext with things like Aquanet and Vicky and so on. This idea that you had essentially snippets that were groups of other snippets, and those groupings themselves had semantic meaning. And so I just parked that one there as something we might think about when we're putting things into the XR space. And there's also, as Fred was just showing the work he was doing for a guide for the book, it seemed like I was watching somebody trying to make a book out of a hypertext. And maybe that's the problem. If just make the hypertext and then you can serialize it. If it has to be in a linear form because it has to have a linear form, well, then you can give it whatever you like. But if the expectation is people need to move through the information space differently according to what they're doing and the way in which they perceive things, my suggestion is you want to write it as a hypertext and worry about the linearization right at the end. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We now have Peter.
Okay, I have a few thoughts. First, Fabian's already done an excellent job of reifying commands by representing them as the little clickable textual elements that can be made hidden or visible as we wish. But I think we need to start abstracting out some other ideas, like the general configuration of the space, um, the notion of a class of commands representing layout functionality that could have a distinct look from other kinds of commands. So, because right now all the commands essentially look the same, and you don't have any guide just intuitively as to what kind of functionality is represented in them. Um, it might be interesting to explore what we could do with the physics-based simulation technology that's built into most of the 3D engines. Um, it could certainly make selecting things easier if we could actually imagine that there were gravitational fields associated with the different elements in the space. So that as you drew a pointer or some sort of a probe in the data space close to something, it would actually get pulled in by the gravity well, and then we could modify that gravity well function on the fly so that one function could be related to frequency, another function could be related, on some conceptual level. But we can imagine a few different dimensions that we might want to have apply to the text. We really need layers of abstraction. I think that's what we're lacking. So far, we've just been looking at directly modeling concrete things, and we're not leveraging the computational power of the environment and the power of abstractions.
Peter, what do you recommend for us to do that?
Um, I've been looking at the Babylon JS rendering engine. It seems to have a little bit more functionality than A-frame. So I'm just like pursuing that as a separate side project to see where I can push that.
Okay, keep us posted. It sounds interesting. And we have Aspasia with us. Is that a bot?
No, no, no. It's a friend of mine. I studied with her, and she's trying to listen in today.
Oh,
Just
good.
so she's texting on the side saying she couldn't really join. I said, "Come on!" And then she's slightly here. Next time, I expect her to
Glad.
be fully here.
Well, welcome. Good to have another woman in the room.
Yes.
All right, Bob, and then Alan.
Oh, did I lose my react? Okay, I'll put my hand back up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Come back. Come back. Your turn.
Okay, I'll do it really quickly. And one of my comments was, Alan, I'm glad you figured out the button. You see, what you're saying there, Tom, is really, really core to what we're talking about. So just briefly on an opposite side. So we talked a lot about folding paper, but as I was going to bring this up, can you see the watermarks?
Yes.
It's cool, right? Maybe completely irrelevant, but it's to highlight the fact that we have so many dimensions to talk about. It's not just the shape, and we should not get lost in talking about cube versus this kind of cube, but we should definitely talk about it and definitely do some sketching and definitely change our minds. But the whole notion, going back to you, Tom, and to finish, what is the intention of the author? We got to help them communicate that through whatever means. And then we've got to help the reader comprehend the intention critically from a connected perspective, so it's not, brainwashing. Completely agree, but this particular Sloan grant that we're very lucky to have is about academic communication. So at some point in the middle, it's got to look a little academic-y. That's all. I hope we can go all over the place. And Bob, sorry, Dene, I'm ready for Bob.
Well, let me call on him since I am the official moderator today. Let me do my job. Bob.
I am going to try to share my screen here. Can you see it?
Yes.
All right.
And Bob, if I were to make that a shape, it would be an origami swan.
It's just a big what I call a panel, but I don't care what you call it. And it contains approximately 25 scaffoldings, or what I call platforms for thought. These are 25 of the ways that people, academics in particular, but also business people, government people, nonprofit people, even younger people organize their thought. I'll repeat that. This is a way of a visual way of putting together the little cubes. Each one of the little chunks in each one of these 25 scaffoldings could be thought of as one of your cubes. It's an idea. And one of the things that we're talking about is, how do you put ideas together? Well, we put them together in very particular ways. And then most academics then put them together in a long stream of text. One page after page after page after page after page of text, without our even being able to see what the structure of the thought is. So in the upper left hand, let's see, when I'm looking at it, I hope the screen is the same way as you're looking at it. In the upper left hand corner are two examples. I'll move my cursor around, of argumentation mapping.
Mm-hmm.
Next to it are some, and there's no organization to this. This just is, I just decided to put all my different platforms for thinking onto one page with an example that I had actually worked on for a client. Usually, I would say 3/4 of these for a client. That is, they paid for it. So it was worth something to them to have their thought organized in some particular way. And each one of these has different kinds of structuring. And I would suggest that, and I'm stuck in 2D world. I'm not in. I'm not. I cannot contribute very much to the 3D world of virtual reality. Partially because I'm very interested in solving some thinking with the tools that I have. These are the tools that I have. These are tools that I've taught. Some of these I have on argumentation mapping taught whole courses on. On others in dashboards, I've made, help make various clients happy with how they put that in. Are there any of these that you'd like to see?
Bob, I'm going to say this. I think it's not. I would love to, just from a curator standpoint, I would love to take your posters and fill a room with them. Like, make it a four-wall projection of all these different things you have. I mean, I think what you've done is two-dimensional, no problem with that. But I think what's really interesting is the way you've imagined this in such detail. And from a curator standpoint, I'd love to map out an entire room full of all of these experiences so that people can see the breadth of what's possible, because I do not think people understand what's possible, having taught all these years. So that's my first response. My second response is, I think it's worth you doing another presentation and going through some of these individually with us and let us see them, because some of these are potentially three-dimensional objects.
Yes.
And
Yes, they are.
I think as a group, we can go through those together and spend some time thinking about that. So let's not do that today. That should be a session on
Okay.
its own, on this
No
very,
problem.
because you've got so much there. You sent me material about this, and I'm bowled over by this work. And like I said, I'd like to see an exhibition of it. I think it's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think this definitely something we need to be looking at. You're so far ahead of the time.
I think you just built, I think it's something that if you're, I love the, as I said today, I'd love to have matrices for any one of these, any one of the chunks that I have on here, or all right, I'll say cubes. Let's say this is a scaffolding where I made where we wanted to find out if we said this, what would it depend on? And I would love to have been able to do a matrix with any one of those idea chunks or cubes. Anyway,
Yep.
I'll get off my screen here and
Let's you and I talk about how to present this at an upcoming event in May.
Okay.
I love it. We have Alan next, and then Frode, and then Peter.
How do I get out of here? Share.
At the bottom, you can unshare.
Stop.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, got it.
Frode can take
Okay,
control over it and take it away from you.
got it.
that's really good stuff, Bob, and I like the general tone of what I understand of the shaping of ideas, similar to some work I was doing a couple of years ago. This has almost nothing to do with that. If that's okay, I'd like to share something that someone else made that I just think is it might be ultimately useful for the conversation in a maybe not an immediate way. But I'd like to share my screen briefly. Here we go. This is part of the HTML review. Let me know if you can see it. Can you see navigation cues?
I see a page. There's looks like you've got a sound bar when I speak or something.
Ah, that's not right. Okay, so we'll do that. Try this again.
Good afternoon, Brandel. Good morning.
Should be over here.
I feel like the whole party's here today.
Can you see this?
Yes.
There it is. That's it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Fantastic. So this is just I saw this. I thought it was beautiful. I wanted to bring it up to the group. It may apply to VR, it may not, but this is a designer, developer, Domitelle Debray, I believe. She's in Paris. It's for the HTML review. So, you have here obviously a header, and it's about scrolling. You can scroll, right? So pretty standard, up and down. What's beautiful, though, I think, is that if you take a look at the surrounding text that is in very light gray, you'll see scroll bars are one of the few UI elements controlled by both browsers. Okay, now I'm going to scroll down, and that is not the content that was there previously. It has been replaced. So this is a cringy-like experience, right? This is an example of exactly what you don't want to see. Go back up, you can still see that the grayed out words are there. Go down, it's gone, and it's still gone. It's just been pushed around. Now you can see that there are other italic quotes in italic that are barely visible.
No.
No.
Oh,
But if you go up, you can actually start to, I guess if what I love about this is if you let go of what the scroll means and just start to read these over time, you get into a different space where you're reading the main focus that that's in the view portal, but you can also get these kind of like peripheral annotations that are seemingly related to what that main content is, but without any lines or arrows or trying to be declarative. Um, it's pretty wild. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what's working here. And it may not be a scalable design, but I just wanted to share it with the group to be like, this is something that seems to blow apart our most basic models. And it's exciting.
We're able to do that in Twine. Alan, have you seen Twine?
Oh yeah, I've messed with Twine since 2017.
Yeah. I mean, Chris Klimas's tech. We're able to do that same effect in Twine, and then Nick Montfort does it with JavaScript, of course.
Yeah.
It's fast. I mean, it's
So
beautiful
maybe it's not
work.
all that new. It struck me as pretty new to try and tell like an essay this way.
Yeah, this is just, I mean, this is great. I'm not denigrating it. In my field, electronic literature, we're playing with this for creative purposes, right? Or hypertextual essays, a creative essay, using everything from JavaScript to Twine, which makes it possible to make it a lot easier for people who don't code. Um, but this is fascinating from the standpoint of how we're able to articulate things with eraser text and all kinds of interesting effects on text, which I think is fantastic. This is great. Do you know what code she's using to do that? Are you looking at the back of it?
I am looking at the back. Yeah, I mean, she's got data index. There's something at the bottom called scroll mirror. So that's probably the library that's being used. And I haven't dug into it too much more from there, but it is, I could say that the order of the text doesn't change. So there's still this canonical version of the text that is in the DOM that is just sort of shuffled around as you scroll. So obviously it's a playful example, but there's something to multi-dimensionality. I think there's an opportunity to make an article go any number of ways this way.
One of my favorite pieces that does that is called The First Draft of the Revolution. Fantastic piece. I'll drop the link in of it for you, but it plays with epistolatory writing where you're able to draft different versions of what you're trying to respond to, and it changes but doesn't change. I mean, it's really fascinating. By
I'm
Emily
looking it up now.
Short. Emily Short, one of the most famous IF artists. First Draft of the Revolution. And we've got it in the next, so I'll drop the link in there for you.
Very cool. All
Wonderful.
right,
Thank
that's
you
it.
for that. And we have Frode and Peter.
I have thoughts.
No way.
No way, right? So I think what you showed there is a bit different, Alan, than what I expected. Because is it correct that it happens as you scroll? You don't have to click on bits?
That is correct.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting because obviously it's quite, Author has, there's plenty of other software where you can click on bits to see them and it's part hidden. I think the interaction of just scrolling and it automatically does that makes it a new thing.
It also shuffles around. It wasn't this there you it's an yeah, they almost have it designed so that you get lost in it because it's no longer sequential.
Right. And also, I see Brandel talking about the iPad. Really, one of the early promises of the iPad was comic books, where it would automatically, you double tap and it would go into one specific frame, right? One cell, which was really, really cool. So I think what you're showing here and that kind of going in and out and these things is really interesting. I also just wanted to highlight, Mark Anderson pointed out that the faded stuff may actually be useful for highlighting because it makes you look at it more. But my original hand was up for Bob. And in one sense, Bob, what you've shown can quote unquote easily be done in XR, any of those layouts. But the fact that it can easily be done with someone who has the right system and the right training doesn't really scale to what we're talking about. So to find ways to do two separate things. One, allow someone to, like Photoshop or Illustrator ways to do it, which can be done now, just like it can be done in Illustrator, is one thing. But I'm all about the metadata. So if you think about the columns and the rows, the spreadsheet we looked at earlier, if that can be used intelligently to go on to templates, I think that's very exciting. The most obvious boring one, if you have place names and you pull it out into spatial, all the names on the map that has something lights up, pretty obvious. But I think what will be exciting if we can do that to all these other types of views. So we need to develop the interactions for that, because I really don't want it to be just, but I know you all agree, I'm talking to the choir here, we shouldn't just click a button on a keyboard. There should be gestures to allow you to explode things, move it in, spread it out, all that good stuff. So very glad you showed that, Bob. And yes, back to you, Dene.
I want to respond to that, and then we'll go to Peter. So those of you have seen what we're doing with the visualization space, right, and the objects, which I'm talking about all this week while I'm here in London. But what we decided to do, since our objects are so different, so we have like a helmet that was worn by one of the artists while he was performing. We've now made it possible to pick up the helmet and put it on your head and wear it and see it on your head, right? Look up and see the brim. So that object is different than the object of the beach ball, which you can throw, or the object of the brooch, which you can put on. So we've decided that instead of having a template where all the objects just are thrown in and you do this, you click here and you do this same kind of repetition, every object has its own gestures. Now that presents a problem because you want people to you want it to be intuitive, you want people to be able to know what exactly to do with an object. But our idea is that people expect to wear a brooch or put a hat on or throw a ball. So what we're going to do is have a little modal show up in the space with the object in the VR space. That's just a visualization of what is possible to do with each object. So, and that way we can get around this idea that there's like one set of gestures for all objects. Each object is indigenous and has its own indigenous features and behaviors, which will be interesting. So, and Andrew's kicking me about it. He's did all the programming on it. Peter.
Okay, I'm dropping a couple of links in the side chat. I just wanted to call your attention to how the new media reader book tried to preserve hypertextuality while linearizing it in a book format using its really interesting system of margin annotations. Ah, yes, there. Mark Anderson has his copy too, and excellent. It's a great book, but it's really important, I think, to be able to linearize and extract content from our 3D environments so that it can be transmitted through a 2D channel. Actually, 1D, really. Well, yeah, I guess it's a 1D channel when it turns into pure text. And then pull that back into the 3D environment. So something like a markdown that would allow us to describe spatial structures so that it could be ingested back into the system on someone else's machine after having been sent through as an email attachment that was comprehensible to the human reading the email and also interpretable by the system, and then be able to go in the environment, move things around or whatever, grab an abstraction from the system, and get a textual representation of it again that you could blast through an email channel without depending upon any symbolism or anything that isn't available in the older textual media.
That's great. Yeah, that book is fantastic. I think there's not one person I know that hasn't taught it at some point. Thank you for that. And Bob, back to you.
I just have a question here for, I guess, Frode or Dene. I thought it was very helpful that Frode had a presentation, a couple of, I saw it last week, of all the different kinds of elements or factors or units or of analysis that might be displayed in the matrix or on the sidebars or so forth. That was very helpful, and I hope that's preserved somewhere easily, that we can get to it, because I think it's one of the advances in this project so far. My question is there similarly just a list? This was just a list that he had. Is there a list of the gestures or the actions that we want gestures for? So I can think about it offline. I can wave my hand around while I'm making coffee. Is there such a list of these actions and gestures so far?
Yes and no.
If so, where?
All over in some places. Frode, I'll let you respond to that and your own response.
That highlights a deep question, and that is exactly what Dene said. It's all over the place because it's so easy to make a new one. So when you're doing something like that, how do you manage lists, right? Publish and subscribe, all these things of how do you make documents come together is important, instead of typing the same darn list again and again, transclusions, all of these things. So that's really, really important. But it also highlights an issue. So Jessie, most of you know Jessie Geely. She wanted to be here today, but she's got classes on Mondays. We had a discussion last week when she was here on the difference in your brain between learning and inventing. It really comes down to something like that, Bob, because if you are learning something, there's an expectation that there is a coherent model of that thing out there. So in a way, your brain can relax and learn a bit of this and that, see how it hangs together. But when you are inventing something, there is no such expectation because it doesn't exist. So that is why inventing something like this is really very, at least for me, very, very, very hard. Because you have all these floating different aspects of things and gestures, Bob, you're absolutely right. And what we need to do, these are really important things. So the way that I handle the question of that is I keep rewriting things on purpose, and the act of writing, there's a very famous movie where the manuscript is thrown out the window, and that's the point, because then you have to reinvent something with Marilyn Monroe and Einstein. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but at this point, we're really trying to narrow down on, we're putting somebody in this headset. We want to write a user guide for them, and they need to be able to do the things we talked about earlier, see connections and a large volume of stuff. So we got to decide on what kind of stuff. What do the individual bits look like, and how do they look like when they come together into shapes? That's why today we're talking about shapes and also transitions, because we really don't want to be Microsoft Word and have 200 buttons, right? We got to keep, and this is why I really want us in a fun way to fight. I want anybody to say, no, that's not the best way. Let's do it this way and see what comes out. And that's why it changes a lot, which is very frustrating for everybody. But in closing on this, Bob, you can invent your gestures even for fun, just like this, and lifting up. Many of them can be willowed out because when we talk, we may do them and cause accidental gestures. We call it gesture clash, right? There are these issues that we're finding out, but in terms of our imagination, we shouldn't worry about that too much. Right, I'll just end up with two practical things. One thing we learned last year is if you touch your own body, specifically your hands, it's very unlikely you're doing that by mistake. So it's very likely it'll be understood. However, current systems, the hand just doesn't necessarily always connect, right? So there are these issues, but they're getting better and better. Fabian is compiling a list of which limbs basically work and which don't. The other thing was this notion of you put your hand inside the cube to do something. That is based on what we discovered today is if you have a space defined, then you can do more specific gestures for that. You can imagine a sci-fi mech suit where you have a place for your hands. So there you can drive the vehicle through fine movements that if you put your hand somewhere else, those movements aren't registered. So I would very, very much like to have lots of articles to put into our book this year on how about we have a gesture for this? How about we have a shape for that? Just have fun is my final comment on that.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of different shapes and gestures over the next, years, and it'll eventually shake out. I mean, I think about early Christianity and all the different sects that existed, and, they were beaten down into two major sects. So, but I think we're looking at exploration of a lot of different possibilities. We have someone here named Astro Druid. Who is that?
Good question.
You're welcome to be here. Who are you?
Hello. Sorry, was not expecting the call out. Nice to meet you all. I am a. Am I coming through?
Yeah,
Yes,
glad you're here. Don't feel embarrassed. I didn't mean to call you out, but we always try to be friendly.
I appreciate that. A friend of mine led me on to you all. I met them through the from OMI group. I come from, let's see, I come from VR chat. I have a community there, which I call the Transplanter Ecological Society. And we discuss ways that the metaverse should be shaped for overall human good, I guess. And I'm here to listen to, I'm actually a bit overwhelmed because I feel like y'all have been talking about a lot of stuff that I've been talking about. So I'm a fly on the wall right now. I'd be happy to introduce myself as I get a little more situated here. Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, glad to meet you, and perhaps we can talk and have you present about your group to us. I think that sounds interesting. We are looking at this for moving society forward in a positive way, trying to break open some of the bonds that I feel like we've been, constrained by, thinking about new ways of thinking. So I think we might have a lot of connections. So thank you for being here today.
I've been looking at a holistic approach for producing the metaverse. Imagine we host the metaverse in a public library, and it becomes such as like a global commonwealth where everyone owns the assets, and the library distributes both real world and digital resources using the metaverse as a medium. It's like a network of commons is what I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I teach at Washington State University, Vancouver, and last Friday night was Geek Movie Night for my students. And I have read Ready Player One, and we showed the movie, which I've never seen. And to me, that is like the worst possible iteration of the metaverse. But, there are ways to make the metaverse work. It's definitely not what Zuckerberg's imagining.
It's just that a lot of the coders are locked in on this cyberpunk future is just the reality from what I've talked to. I talked to a lot of people that are building platforms throughout VR chat and around VR chat. There's one coming up called Basis, one called Verity. The project I'm linked to right now is called Visakai. That's built with the Godot engine. There's also Bark VR. I met a few, but the XR stuff is, I think, the future. Imagining, I guess one of my core things is that I talk about is that we have a total society of players and gamers. It's actually what separates us from other species. It's a universal identity where if we were to meet aliens and they were able to play cooperative games, we'd be able to build a system that makes us compatible to work together.
It's interesting you say that because I teach game history at my university, and Huizinga is one of my favorite people to teach.
Yes, Homo ludens.
Yeah, Homo ludens, and he argues that mammals play, and reptiles play, that all animals play. So this is a topic that we can have in the future. So I do want to talk to you about coming back. Let's go now to Mark. So welcome. Let's go to Mark and Jim and Frode because we only have 15 minutes because I have to leave for my 10 o'clock.
Okay, very quickly, and I put in some as well. Just a point to reflect on. We were looking at the sort of the grid idea of exploding out essentially an object of interest at the top of the talk. One thing that it keeps nagging at me though, whenever I've done this sort of thing, it's that certain types of data, invariably the things we'd like to look at, especially timelines or especially groups of people or places, are incredibly lumpy. I've never done a project where they've been nicely distributed. Every example I've seen of how you might do these things always has beautifully distributed data, which implies a sort of a disconnect in the way people are thinking about things. The challenge in that is if things are going to be lumpy, then a display mechanism that doesn't allow for that is problematic for us. And I'm afraid I don't have an answer, but I do think it's worth just keeping a pin in that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Jim and then Frode.
Dene, I'd like to go back to something you said earlier, which I think is central to this whole discussion, and maybe one of its main objectives. What you said was the next way of thinking. I expand that to be plural and think of it as the new, better, plural ways of thinking. And I wanted to relate that to something that Bob had said. And then I think Frode added, Bob asked for a list of gestures, which I think is incredibly important. And we should specifically try to put together a master list because as both you and Frode said, they're all over everywhere. But then I think Frode talked about a friend, or you, about a friend who was talking about differences in the brain and the difference between learning and inventing. And I thought to myself, learning, what does learning involve? Learning involves absorbing information and relating existing information to what I already know. I decided that would be called contextualizing. My point is simply that your next way of thinking phrase, if expanded, could become one of the objectives for this entire group, because learning and inventing and absorbing and relating and contextualizing are all different and perhaps better ways of thinking. And I can't think of this as one of several objectives that probably relates directly to your Sloan funding obligations.
And let me respond to that. One of the first books I studied in graduate school was Ways of Thinking by John Berger, right? Very influential book. Do you know it, Jim?
No.
Yeah, and this was it came out, almost 50 years ago. It's an old book and little tiny book. One of my favorite things are these tiny books that are full of stuff, right? That simple,
I agree.
like Medium the Massage. Yeah, I mean, just a really fantastic book. And it was influential for art history. and a lot of other kind of fields that we're looking at, media, for example. And so it's still looking at media from the standpoint of film and television. But if we think about some of the principles he addresses in the book, we can apply them to today, right? So it'd be an interesting exercise to go through that book and think about ways of thinking in XR from the perspective of through the lens that he was already putting together for us. So, Ways of Thinking by John Berger, British art historian. Let me ask you a favor, Frode. I'm wondering, since we're getting close on time, I think we had another hand up, Bob's hand up. Let's let maybe Bob make this time. No? And because you're going to make the concluding comments. So we're at concluding comments time. So you can speak and then end.
I can speak and end. Okay. Well, I'm very good at speaking and
I'm
ending.
so polite.
Yes. Well,
I'm in England. I'm trying to be better.
I'm not going to be speaking for 11 minutes. So I'm sure there will be other questions. One thing is, as I mentioned before, this is amazing. Brandel probably knows every single thing in here, but it says it's a bit about AI. You can ignore the AI. It basically talks about some of the underlying philosophical ideas of the brain. It really goes into the stages. And so much of what I'm hearing now, it relates to stuff in the book. I'm not going to go into that particularly now. But the reason I put my hand up was you were talking about sects, Dene. And so I wrote sects and gloves and glasses and hats, oh my. The individual differences are so important. Yeah, exactly. Sects, like religious sects and ways of looking at. Yeah,
As opposed to that.
I'm sure the transcript will have a fun time with that one. So my ACM hypertext paper last year was about different visions, different ways of looking, which of course goes across different people, but it also goes across, as Mark has pointed out, when you're reading to write and you're reading to edit, it's very different. You're reading in a light and a dark room, you need to change it, right? So the notion we have that we've talked about a while ago here is, and Dene, it was so great, she mentioned that hat. What if that hat, literally feeling like you're putting on a hat, will give you a different set of brains in the room? That could even be AIs. What if you put in different glasses for different visualizations? You really do this, right? You should be able to do different gloves, because this gesture thing, I mean, if we had proper resources, we have good resources, I could imagine that you put on a different set of gloves and suddenly I'm using Bob Horn's gestures, right? We should not be locked into one set of gestures, one way of doing it. So as a kind of a fantasy way, let's just imagine that like in a medium bad sci-fi movie, you can put on a different persona or avatar, and depending on how you choose to be in that space, you interact with that space differently. And then as a community, we can whittle down a few that we'll see if we can implement. And on that note, what Fabian is building is called spatial scaffolding. We'll find a better name for the Sloan part of it, but the notion of scaffolding is obviously really, really important. A good scaffold helps you be free. And Mark, you said we can't be too constrained here, but if you have complete freedom, you're going to end up with things a little too much like that. So that is why I really wanted to talk today about the shapes and transitions. And I really want us all to continue that, because look at us. We have very, very different brains in this room. And we know people with very, very different brains. So even if you do something as ridiculous as I did, take a picture of a crumpled piece of paper on the subway, if there's something that makes you think of shapes, please share it and we'll try to put it into some coherent form. And yeah, I think that's my almost favorite final words for today. Back to you, Dene.
I think we have Carl, and he has not spoken the whole time, so we definitely want to hear from our friend Carl.
On Rhoda's comment about gestures, and everybody has their own gestures that you can wear as gloves, or you have some contextual way to switch between them. When I was working at the Army Corps, I was in the process of developing a discretized gesture library for hand tracking, in that you treat each one of your 5 digits as indexed in a list. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you had a tuple with each one of those digits in that index. So you had a 2D array. And whether that finger was curled in or extended was a state. And then so with a combination of these 5 tuples, you could define a hand gesture. So this is digit 0 in position 1 and digits 1, 2, 3, and 4 in position 0. And that's a thumbs up symbol. And you can, once you discretize them that way, as far as sets of tuples that are binary, it's very easy for your user, even in headset, to define a gesture that correlates to a specific hand posture or whatever, and have them link that gesture to be the triggering or firing mechanism for a certain piece of code. And then you can just save that as a preference document for a user or encode that onto the context in whatever way. But it works, and it's a little weird to explain to people, but when you discretize it that way, you can do a lot of stuff with it. And that would probably be a good way to scaffold what Frode was talking about, as far as everybody has their own gestures, and then you can trade and swap those contexts by basically just sending a text-based config file to another user over the net. Over.
Thank you. And Frode, I need to be leaving in about 2 minutes. So did you want to say something else before I leave?
Yeah, really briefly, I just saw what Tom posted here. He wants this kind of a shape. I don't. I find this a mess. So that's perfect. That means we can have a discussion around it. What you said there, Carl, is absolutely brilliant. We need to work on that. And yeah, just keep thinking. But it was just that little spark of that particular galaxy. Now, also, Tom has sent me a presentation that he'd like to make for the group. So we're going to find a time for that. Dene and I haven't had a chance to plan recently, so we will do that. So, Brandel, could you please mention what you wrote there, and then back to Dene to say bye-bye.
Oh, it's just technical details. I think in order to fully specify hand pose, you need an orientation vector for the palm, and then consider 2 degrees of freedom for your thumb and forefinger, because they have multiple degrees. So it's not just the curl factor, but that's a representation that's remarkably eerily close to something that I dreamed up in on a way up to San Francisco on the bus once. So I think you're probably right, Carl.
Well, I want to say goodbye to everybody. Thank you for allowing me to have 2 weeks off. We had a chancellor search for my campus. And those of you who are in academia know that that's a huge thing to have someone come and lead you. I was not thinking I was involved in the search, but I ended up getting drawn into it through the faculty organization that I lead. We had 3 really bad candidates, and then finally the 4th arrived, and I felt hopeful. This is going on tape, so let's not put this online today. But it was really an experience to go through what we've gone through. And Frode, can you put this off record now? On Sunday?
Sorry, I just wanted to have the ending back on recording. Sorry.
I'll see Frode on Sunday. And today I went to Waterstones and bought a chess set and a chess game book for his son Edgar, so Edgar can become a chess master. So.
Very good idea.
Anyway, bye everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, so from Dene and me, thank you, everybody. And from me,
Bye, Dene.
Homework.
Homework.
Write stuff down. I don't think you guys always remember how important you are, because just by the very act of writing some of this down, in the future, people will be able to look back at it. You know, as most of you know, my basically mentor for a while was Doug Engelbart, as Pasiemo certainly knows, because you met him through me many years ago when we were both students. And, you know, Doug, despite having changed the world, was wondering what more he could do and questioning who he was and stuff. But the point is, who cares who we are? If we thoughtfully work together, write down stuff, then in the future we can inspire people, right? So let's keep doing that and recording. And any other final thoughts? We have 30 seconds left.
Download the Vision OS beta.
What? Download it? Which one? Okay.
2.4.
Will do. Okay. Bye.